Welcome. My name is Michael Fleischman. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships here at AIPAC, and thank you for joining us for our conversation today with Congresswoman Grace Meng from New York, who's also my former boss. Congresswoman, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
May I call you Grace?
Yes.
You don't by chance recognize this tie? By any
I
chance?
do. Staff gift, holiday time.
Wow, I'm impressed. Well, it's in the pantheon of my good luck ties, and brings back very fond memories of our time working together. And I actually started my own career in this whole world, working with you in Queens in your first election to Congress. Tell us a little bit about your background growing up in Queens and why you decided to run for office.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for all the work that you do here at AIPAC, and also to help me get to where I am today. As you know, part of my story growing up, I was born and raised in Queens, New York, and my parents were immigrants to this country in the early 70s. My parents worked in a restaurant for most of my childhood, and later on owned their own restaurant and became small business owners. Somewhat typical story of immigrants from anywhere around the world when they first come to the United States. I never actually considered running for office. I was a really shy kid growing up. I didn't really know people or think about going into politics. And it's not something we talked about at the dinner table. But, I realized soon after I graduated law school, and I had had many internships working for different government agencies. So I was really passionate about working in the halls of government, but not necessarily running for office. And I just started to realize, working in the community, that being in politics, politics when used correctly can really help a lot of people at once. And so I was really fascinated with politics and government. I felt like, as an Asian American, as a woman, as a mom, that there just weren't enough of our voices in the halls of government.
Great answer, although I know your mom is not going to appreciate the Stuyvesant omission there. But we can address that. But no, but seriously, it really was the American dream par excellence. But we have seen a rise in hate crimes in Queens and in your district, and the Asian American community, the Jewish community, and that has really impacted your constituents. Tell us a little bit about your work and your efforts to combat that.
Sure. Well, the last few years have been really difficult for so many Americans around the country. We've been continuously battling this global pandemic, and my home district of Queens, New York, was one of the earliest epicenters of the epicenter. But, in addition to battling the pandemic, our Asian American community was also battling a parallel virus of discrimination and bigotry. People did not know much about the coronavirus, and people often, in tough times, look for scapegoats. And so before the virus even hit us here in the United States, we were already hearing about incidents where people were refusing to go to Asian-owned businesses. They thought if I went to my local Chinese takeout that I could catch the virus. So we were hearing about a lot of incidents like that. And, after, I think, Atlanta, where 8 people were murdered, 6 were Asian American women, I think the mainstream community really started to take notice of what was going on. And different communities, including the Jewish community, were with us standing at protests and vigils and rallies, and were really instrumental in helping us pass and write, legislation like our COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which addresses discrimination against all communities. And so even though it's been a really tough time these few years, I think one of the good things that has come out of all this is that different communities, including the Jewish and Asian American communities, have learned to get to know each other better and have been able to work more closely together.
Thank you for your leadership there. turning to foreign policy and the region, you visited Israel with AIEF in 2013, and I recall that the visit to Sderot made a particular impact on you. I know your children were young at the time, and you had seen how kindergartens and playgrounds were serving as bomb shelters. And following that experience, you took the lead on the inaugural congressional letter advancing missile defense funding on Capitol Hill. Tell us a little bit about this experience and your leadership in that space.
Well, I'm really grateful for that experience to be able to travel to Israel with AIEF, and that's why I think it's so important that people do visit the state of Israel. We can read about and hear about the importance of U.S. aid and how it goes towards protecting families, but not until you're on the ground witnessing it and literally hearing from families who benefit from the support and the resources that America gives to literally save lives. Can you really appreciate its importance and need? So when I had gone to Sderot, we were in a playground that was fortified, and they showed us what kids would have to do. And I remember there were naive questions like, how many minutes do kids have to hide? And someone said, it's not minutes, it's seconds, right? Wow. And so to hear these testimonies from parents, just like me, who had children the same age that mine were, have to run to bus stops, had to be ready to seek shelter within seconds, when they were innocently playing as children in a playground, as children should be, without a worry. They had to be worried, and they had to be on top of it. And so we were able to see how these programs that would literally save their lives if there were rockets fired were so important to the families there. And they're just not families. They are, in many cases, families of my own constituents, families of Americans in New York who are over in Israel. And that's why programs like that are so important. And we saw how even America itself benefits from programs like Iron Dome, where we were able to see it used to protect our own embassy. And so these are programs that benefit everyone.
Yes, and thank you as well for your, the inaugural and now perennial congressional letter where you rally the troops on a bipartisan basis to push for that funding and really hold the flag for that every year. And as we know from our lobbying experience, the missile defense funding is separate from the security assistance, and it's the latter which falls within the jurisdiction of your subcommittee, of which you're the vice chair of the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee, which works to ensure that $3.3 billion of security assistance for Israel every year and deals with some as well as with thorny issues regarding the Palestinians. And these set of issues, as we know, has become harder and more tense in the last couple of years. There's some are in favor of conditioning aid to Israel, which we strongly oppose. So if you could maybe peel back the curtain for us a little bit. I don't think we need like the whole story, but maybe just some tidbits on how the sausage gets made here, particularly this past year.
Sure. Well, obviously there always are tough discussions on many issues, and sometimes this is one of them. However, I do want to note that security funding and aid to Israel is a very bipartisan issue. Okay. Most Democrats, most Republicans support funding, and this is part of an agreement made back when President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu were in office, and that's something that we believe strongly that America intends to fully carry out. And we've seen this every year since then in our committee. And so this is something that that's non-negotiable. And of course, there are discussions on local initiatives, local aid, and how the Palestinians and Israelis coexist. But I do want to make sure that we are doing what we can to protect families on the ground. We continue to push for and to encourage a two-state solution. The reality of families on the ground, we talk about kids. Palestinian kids, Israeli kids live and work, coexist very closely to each other over there. And so it's important that we're doing everything we can to keep them safe.
So in relation to safety and security, and this is an issue that I think maybe we don't know all as much about. So perhaps you could educate us a little bit. We and you did note the forthcoming downgrade of the position of the United States Security Coordinator, which we've all known for Israel and the Palestinian Authority, which we all know has been essential to preserving that very security and hope for the future that you've just so eloquently set forth. In light of that potential downgrade, in advance of the president's trip, you led another large bipartisan letter urging and fighting for the maintenance of that United States Security Coordinator at the level that it's been at. Tell us a little bit about this and why you think it's so important.
Sure. Well, I do appreciate the truly bipartisan effort that we helped lead in Congress to make sure that the security coordinator was kept at the level that they are at. This is something that we work closely with our Democratic chairpersons also, Rosa DeLauro and Barbara Lee on my subcommittee. Yeah. And so it was very bipartisan, and I'm glad to have seen that be maintained. And as we saw with the tragedy of a journalist, Shireen, who was killed, it was good that we had someone at that level so that they could maintain the neutrality and the investigation that was carried through.
On the president's recent visit to Israel, there was the signing of the Jerusalem Declaration, which, among other things, reiterates opposition to a nuclear Iran. Back in 2015, you were the first Democrat to oppose the JCPOA. From the vantage point of today, what concrete steps do you think the administration can take going forward? It's a tough issue. Sure.
Well, Michael, you were around at that time, and we had a lot of conversations. And I do remember one of the conversations that we had was that could I trust Iran to do the right thing? And the answer was no. And they've continued to prove themselves as a bad actor and an actor in bad faith. And recent news also shows that they're not even letting inspectors, inspect. And so the most basic reasons why I oppose the deal, from sunset clauses to lack of a fair and accurate inspections process to sanctions relief and to the inadequate scope of the agreement continued to hold true today. I didn't like that President Trump took us out of the agreement because I thought that reflected poorly on the credibility of our country. But I still believe that we should hold true to trying to negotiate a deal that has more breadth, more scope, and to address issues like ballistic missiles that weren't even part of the initial agreement, and to address the initial concerns that I and many people, Democrats and Republicans, had in the first place.
Yes. And I know our community remembers that while many others were kind of looking around at taking political temperature, seeing where the winds were going, you stepped forward once you had answered those basic questions and come to those conclusions. So we appreciate that.
And I will say that politically, it was one of the hardest decisions I've had to make to go against my own party.
Yes, the pressure was enormous. Yeah.
And because of that, I didn't get to fly on Air Force One like many of my colleagues did. Yes. But to this day, I've never had a moment of regret. I have to take tough votes and make tough decisions often, but I have to be able to sleep at night to make sure that I took votes that were of my conscience and that would keep as many people safe as possible.
Yeah. What did you think of the president's visit generally?
Well, I was really glad to see President Biden visit Israel, and I was really heartened to see his visit to Yad Vashem, which I have been to as well, and to meet Holocaust survivors is something that was not just important for a photo opportunity of that moment, but to demonstrate to the country, our country, to demonstrate to the world the risk of not standing up against anti-Semitism, hate, and bigotry. I was speaking to a group of young people just today, talking about the importance of educating people about the Holocaust. We can't assume that everyone grows up knowing about the Holocaust and its implications, and how something like the Holocaust started way back when. It doesn't become the Holocaust overnight. Verbal expressions of bigotry and discrimination, even before they become physical attacks, before they become larger scale, murders, need to be stopped, and we need to speak up against hate and bigotry. And that's why, we talk about anti-Semitism, we talk about anti-Asian bigotry. We have to stand up against hate and speak up and speak out against it, regardless of which community it happens towards.
Education is so important. Grace, thank you so much for being here today, for your leadership, for your long-standing and unwavering support for the U.S. Israel relationship.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
And thank you all for joining us again on the AIPAC app.